Professor, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you here. You have studied the question of, it's a good thing to have the intention of getting infrastructure investments made. It's a little harder to get it done, at least in the United States of America. What are some of the impediments to that the Biden administration may be facing right now?
Yeah, great question. And a pleasure to be here. So first, I want to say a little bit on what we see on the ground now. So if you're talking about manufacturing, things actually look really good. What we're seeing is investment in manufacturing, building structures. The current levels of that are roughly double what they were from the period between 2000 and 2019. So we are just blowing out of the water the amount of investment that we're making in manufacturing. This is in real terms, adjusting for inflation. So a lot is getting built in terms of manufacturing. But there are different kinds of investment. We also are making a big push in infrastructure, and in particular things like transportation. And this is not because of this particular administration, but the U.S. just has a long-standing difficulty in building infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, in cost-effective ways. If you look at urban rail, so within a city and it's on a rail, and you compare the U.S. to other high, medium-income countries, on a per-mile basis, the U.S. spends about 2.5 times as much per mile. You compare to the lowest cost countries in Europe, countries like Spain, we spend about 6 times as much per mile. And this is not good.
Zach, as someone who's studied this, as an economist as well as a lawyer, really studied the question of infrastructure. Let's go back to where you started. Is there a big difference between sort of the true public infrastructure, if I can talk it that way, highways, rails, water, electrical grid, and things like that, on the one hand, and on the other hand, some things that the government may get involved in, at least in subsidizing and really encouraging, but that also private corporations do? I mean, when you talk about building semiconductors, that's something typically in the United States we let private companies do. Is there a different way to approach those two questions?
Yeah. So roads are public goods. Makes a lot of sense for the government to be in charge of building them. It would be very problematic if a private company owned the road in front of my street and were like holding me each time I wanted to enter my house. That would be a bad way of running things. So it makes a lot of sense to have the government own the roads, the highways, and then to subcontract out to the private sector to actually have them built. There's a whole different thing going on with manufacturing. We do not want the government to be the one, actually building the semiconductors. We want the private sector to be doing that. Those are not public goods. Those are goods that are exchanged in competitive markets. And for those, we have, in the case of chips, say a national security reason to onshore those, and thus to provide government subsidies to provide them. There are climate reasons to provide subsidies to bring about the green economy in terms of energy production. And so I think it's good to take these two different approaches. For transportation infrastructure, government designs it and manages it, and then to have subsidies for these other private sector things, which are often in manufacturing.
And finally, we tend to focus on the big projects that we can see, we can touch, we can feel, we can use. What about basic research? Because if you go back in time, as I understand it, a lot of the benefits we have today came from basic research done in the 50s and 60s. And I believe it's the case that during the Eisenhower administration, as a percentage of the federal budget, basic research went up. And since then, it's been going down. How much are we underinvesting in basic research that then we can allow private industry to exploit?
So, great question. If you look at total research and development in the economy, we're doing okay. The U.S. is doing okay relative to peer countries. But like you point out, if you look at government spending on research and development, we are behind peer countries, and we're behind where we used to be. So our private sector in the United States is very innovative. They're doing research and development, but the government is not doing as much as it used to. There's a whole field of economics. There's a lot of evidence. Government research and development into basic science is extremely beneficial. It pays for itself multiple times over. And the logic is actually very similar to the roads. Roads are used by the public more generally. If the government doesn't provide them, they're probably not going to be provided very well. Same thing with basic research. If the government doesn't provide it, we're often not going to have enough of it. So my read of the research is it would be very beneficial to fund more of it. The CHIPS and Science Act authorized increased spending. That has not all been appropriated by Congress, though, and I'm very hopeful, or I really hope that future Congresses increase spending on basic science, including the funding authorized in the CHIPS Act.